Hey, Unchainers! This is Timmert, and you're listening to the Unchaining Me podcast. Hello, podcast listeners. Welcome to this week's episode of the Unchaining Me podcast. I'm so glad you decided to tune in, and I'm so thankful for your time and attention. I wanted to talk about labels and labeling and how dangerous they are and how they take us from the present moment and they belittle us. They boil us down to just single statements or phrases, and how we are so much more than that, and how much of that we do. It's really scary when you really pay attention to how much labeling that the mind is used to doing in every area of our lives, every single minute, if you really pay attention to it, of the day. When we meet new people, even in our own minds, we have already, most of us have labeled ourselves some titles, some names, and it's almost impossible for life to uniquely express itself through us because we are so tied with labels. And it's something that I've been trying to pay attention to in my day-to-day life, especially in my parenting, because I read somewhere, I believe it was Eckhart Tolle's book, where I read that when you label a thing, like for example, you tell a child that a bird is a bird, and he said something to the effect of, the moment you tell a child that a bird is a bird, the child never sees the bird again. Take a moment and let that sink in. The moment you tell a child that that creature is a bird, the child stops seeing the bird. That's the strength of labels. That's the power that labels have. That the moment we attach it to something, we are blind to that thing's true essence or true mystery or true beauty. It's the same thing with flowers. The moment you tell a child, oh, this is a flower, then the child will think that it knows what a flower is because it knows the name. And, I'm giving children as an example because that's what we do as parents. We constantly moving around the world, moving in the world, labeling things for them, teaching them how to label things. And the same thing happens in schools. Same thing happens, when we go to the doctors, when we are filling out, immigration forms. Hey, immigrants, hello, those forms. Or really anywhere else, you're checking boxes, saying yes and no to different things. It's labels everywhere. Everywhere you turn, it's labels. And we can't afford to not talk about the dangers of labeling. And it's a mind activity. Labeling is a mind activity. And the whole point of unchaining ourselves is to get out of the mind as frequently as possible, to use the mind, of course, utilize the mind in our day-to-day lives, but not be attached to it or identified to it, because we are more than that, right? We are more than our minds. So labels are just mere classifications. They could be titles, they could be phrases, words, mother, father, young, old, black, white, Republican, Democrat, fat, skinny, gay. There could be disorders and conditions, especially mental health. Different disorders are so prone to being used as labels. Flower, weed. Language, tribe, the different roles we play can also be labeled. And the very common one, good or bad, beautiful or ugly. I want you to really pay attention when you meet someone new, or you're in a room and someone walks in, you're in a cafe or some event, a birthday, a wedding, and that person enters the room, or you gravitate towards that person, you notice a person. Be very watchful of the first thoughts that you entertain. It's mostly, who is this person? Who are you? And we have that question about ourselves too. And that's what labels try to answer. These questions are, who am I? And we ask the same of others. Who are you? We don't ask them actually. It would be nice if we did, right? But in our minds, we're saying, who are you? Who is this person? What does the shoes she's wearing tell me about her? Are they expensive? Are they cheap? Are they high heels? Are they flats? The way she wears her hair, what does that tell me about her? Her skin color, how do I treat her based off of that? The way she walks, the way she carries herself, what can I label her? Confident? Timid? So we're constantly trying to understand the things that are around us. We could be talking about a person, or we could be thinking about a group of people, or we could be talking, we could be gossiping about someone. Who is so-and-so? Who are they? These questions can be so time consuming. Even the who am I part. I've engaged in self-awareness, self-knowledge actively for the past 6 years. And I know I haven't scratched the surface of who I really am. I'm better off than I was. I've moved far from labels, but I still succumb to them from time to time, even in the way that I look at myself. I look at myself and tell myself, you're fat. I look at myself and give myself a title. I'm a life coach. And then I find myself struggling with a title. And I go to find a different label. Am I a speaker? Am I a podcaster? What is it? Where do I fit in? What box can people put me in? What box can I put myself in? So if you can imagine understanding yourself being a process, you can imagine how we may not have the time or the attention to understand and get to know and truly see the essence of other people. And then forget things, forget birds and flowers, right? Who has the time to walk through nature and truly lose themselves in the essence of what's around us? We're too busy to have time to do those things. We're too identified with the mind to have the time and the attention to devote to those things. So what do? What does the mind do? It goes for shortcuts because it's time consuming to understand, appreciate, get to know ourselves and others. We go for shortcuts. It's truly a brain thing. It tries to simplify. The brain needs to sort out a plethora of information. Labels offer that help. It is a way to assert control. That's another thing that our mind and the ego want. When I mention the ego, I want to encourage you to go back a couple of episodes in the previous season and listen to an episode I did on the ego, because it's a word, a title that some people find confusing, or some people, have labeled it a certain thing. And I want to make sure that every listener understands what I'm talking about when I say the ego. The way I defined the ego was someone who is prideful and cocky and arrogant, just full of themselves. Ooh, you got a big ego. That's what I thought an ego meant. Well, I wasn't wrong, but the ego is so much more bigger than that. The ego is also something that manifests in people who are shy or timid or have a victim identity. That's also ego. So through years of reading and listening to different teachings, I understood that the ego is a level of consciousness that is identified with form. It's identified with the mind. It's identified with a story. So I, as a human being, have a story where I've been, what's happened to me, what I've done to people, who I am, in the ways that I label myself, in the ways that I define myself. So all of those my ego uses to identify me to them, and I lose sense of who I truly am. My authentic essence gets lost in that identification with the ego and the mind. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about the ego. If you want to know more about this, you can go back, like I said, and listen in to an episode I did on strictly the ego. The ego loves controlling. The ego loves boxing, and it wants to manage uncertainty. Same thing with the mind. The mind wants to manage uncertainty. The mind is a tool that is supposed to make sure that we stay safe and thrive on this earth. So it boxes information, it sorts information, and puts whatever it thinks are like together and whatever it thinks are not alike separate in different boxes. That's how it finds security and comfort, or it tries to. Tries very hard. And that's how labels are created. Instead of taking the time to understand, to know something, we put a label on it and we move on. But that is a very dangerous thing. One reason it's very dangerous is if we haven't met ourselves at our authentic state, if we don't know our true essence, then we're not able to connect with other people on that level. True connection is only possible when we know who we are authentically, before all the labels, before all the titles. So our relationships are going to remain superficial and probably troubled too. Because true joy and true love come from authenticity, not labels. When we label people and ourselves, we boil us down to really the bare minimum. And we know that we're more than that. We know that people are more than that. We know someone can't just be a condition. Someone can't just be a title or something that they do. There's more, much more to an individual than any one word or phrase or a list of words or phrases can tell. Labels also create low self-esteem in the labeled. Once you label someone, there could be, arguably, quote unquote, good labels that may make a person feel good about themselves. But then there's also those negative or bad labels which will make the labeled feel low about themselves and face low self-esteem. Shame and guilt can also be associated with labels. The stereotypes work into this. I heard an example given somewhere how there's that label that we put on girls as bad at math. And because of that stereotype, even girls themselves, when they're sitting to take an exam and they write their names and they're asked to write their genders and they write female on there, and that stereotype kicks in and they also believe it because of that stereotype, that because she's a girl, because she's a woman, that she's not going to perform well in that math test. So her performance will be affected and the results end up feeding that very wrong stereotype, which is girls are bad at math. This is a result of labels. Labels keep us from being who we truly are. and who we're truly gifted to be. They keep us from experiencing the wonders and adventures of living. Isn't it marvelous? Isn't it amazing that out of 7-something billion people, there is nobody that is like you? Nobody at all. But if another person is not going to take the time to really know the uniqueness of you, the expression of life that is you, that has not been repeated or will never be repeated, what a waste is that of something so unique. That's the danger and misfortune, really, of labels. We limit and confine people and ourselves when we label. So pay attention next time when you meet someone. Do you rush to get simple answers about them? Do you assume things about them? Ask questions to find, what do you do? What is that question meant for when you ask that person what they do for a living? What is that going to serve you? Is that really going to help you get to know them and appreciate their uniqueness? Or is the intent to boil them down to something, and then the level of attention and respect you give them will depend on what the answer may be? If they say, I'm a doctor, then maybe you're more interested. If they say, I'm a fill in the blanks, I'm a waiter, or I work at McDonald's, are you then going to ration respect and attention based on that? I'm very conscious of labels when it comes to my daughter. She's about to turn 3. But ever since she was a baby, I didn't want to get her pink stuff. Whenever I wanted to get her something, my options were limited to pink and purple. So I made a conscious decision to buy her blue things. And me and my husband have argued about that a few times because I kind of overcompensated and got her only blue things. So my husband made sure he went out and got her pink things. But it's everywhere around us. The way we label our kids, it can determine what they do and what they don't do later on in life. What kind of music they listen to, what kind of games they play, what kind of toys we buy them, what kind of sports they get into, what kind of professions they pick in life. That's how deep this issue of labeling is in the way we parent. Another label that I've been seeing a lot quite lately, and a very dangerous one because it comes attached to personal development or, psychological work or healing, is the word toxic. Oh, she is toxic, or he's toxic, or just we throw that word so nonchalantly. And we have to be very careful not to label people that, because a person is very dynamic. A person can change, a person can grow. And boiling them down to that label that is so negative is something that we need to watch out for. But that's, again, how labeling is something that we do a lot of. So now that we see how dangerous it can be for the labeler and the labeled, now that we see how it takes us away from the wonder and vastness of the expressions of life that we are and the beauty in that, how can we stop? Is it even possible to stop? It's resistant to change because, again, we do a lot of it. It's reflected everywhere. The media reflects it. We go to institutions, there's labels everywhere. The government uses it. But that doesn't mean we're helpless. That doesn't mean it's impossible to rise above it every opportunity we can. The one big tool against labeling, or to help us get rid of labeling, is curiosity. Every time a thought arises in your mind that labels, whether it's you being labeled by yourself or someone else, invite curiosity instead. One of my favorite questions, and I learned this from a teacher named Byron Katie. Look her up, she's amazing. Her signature phrase is it true? She brings that into really any problem that anybody may bring or talk about, any concept, especially around the mind and identification with the mind and the stories that we tell. She is amazing the way she dissects that and makes it so understandable to people. And I started asking myself, is it true for everything? Because you'll realize once, a few times after you ask that question, and you don't just, in the beginning, you don't just ask it in your mind, because you're going to end up not asking it. If you're going to say, oh, I'm just going to think, is it true? And challenge myself on the way, or challenge a thought or a label, you'll say that. But the automatic nature of labeling is probably going to win over whatever kind of thought you think you're going to bring to challenge it. So the first few times, the first time that you're introducing this concept, I recommend you actually get a notebook, a journal, and write, is it true? Whenever a thought arises that includes labels or assumptions. And truly write the answer down. Is it true? She is toxic. Is it true? The way I've defined that as a human being is toxic, is it information that I can take and keep with me and accurately say, this was valid? Is it true? This is good. This is bad. She is mean. Is it true? I'm a failure. Is it true? I have bad luck. Is it true? This is impossible. Is it true? This question that invites curiosity, invites a deeper level of attention into something, could be our way out from a life of compulsive labeling. Another way is to practice sense perception in the present moment. If we are deeply rooted in the present moment, our mind chatter will be kept to the minimum. We can actually experience the power that is in this very moment, the power in the now. And in that moment, there is no labeling, because labeling comes from the chatter of the mind. If we are walking in nature, let's practice being there in a sense perception way. I like walking in my garden on barefoot. That's one of my favorite things to do. I can't do it without paying attention to the sensory perception that I feel on my feet and the soles of my feet. So it keeps me present, it keeps me grounded. But one thing I'm practicing, and I'm failing constantly, but I keep practicing, is non-labeling. When I look at something, I don't want to label it. I want to practice not labeling it, not naming it. It has purpose to some extent. When you communicate with other people, I want to be able to tell my husband, I'm talking about that tomato. Yes, of course. But I want to also be able to take the everything of that plant in without losing any of it to a name, which makes me think I know it. But do I really know a tomato? Do I really know it? The wonder of it? How it goes from a little seedling to a big plant that keeps giving you fruit after fruit, that goes from small and green to big and red, that flowers yellow. Do I really know the life force that's pushing it, pulling it from the soil to the sun to the water? Do I really know that when I just say tomato? I don't. So I try and practice sensory perception. I look at it, the greenness of it, the yellowness of the flower, the redness of the tomato fruit itself. So practicing non-labeling is something that I can do when I am rooted in the sensory perception of the now. When I'm hiking and I'm in the midst of different trees, I remember this quote that I read a while back, and it just stuck with me and resonated with me. I've shared it on my pages. You guys may remember it. It says something to the effect of, whenever you're in the middle of trees in a forest, you don't turn around and look at different trees and label them. You don't go, oh, look at that bent tree. Oh, look at that fat tree. Oh, look at that skinny one. You don't label them. There is something in you that kind of understands why every tree is the way that it is. You don't need to ask the tree why, you just kind of understand it. The life force in you gets it. That the fact that this tree is bent this way is probably because it needed some light and it couldn't get some light this way, so it grew sideways so it could get some light. The fact that this one is really skinny and going up the stem of the other tree is because it needed to reach the light, and the fastest way was to circle around the stem and go up. There's something in you that understands all that, so you don't label them. So why can't we take that same understanding to people and to ourselves? Why can't we say, instead of rushing to give labels, the human in me sees the human in you, to recognize the being in one another and see the marvel in one another. This is my challenge for you guys. This coming week, practice non-labeling. Be aware of that compulsive labeling. That's the first step, is to shine a light on that which used to be subconscious. You weren't aware of it, and you cannot fix anything that you're not aware of, that you don't acknowledge. So just grow conscious to your compulsive labeling this coming week. The way you label yourself, the way you label conditions, the way you label others. And once you catch yourself a few times, and it could be, we all have different inclinations to what we label most times or who we label most times. That exactly would be your opportunity or your stage to practice non-labeling. If you work at Starbucks and you see a lot of people walk in and out, and you notice that you're labeling everybody every time, they come to order at your counter, that's your opportunity. That's your spiritual practice, to practice non-labeling. If you're a doctor and when a patient walks in, or you look at a form and see what boxes they've ticked, the subconscious labeling kicks into gear and you start labeling them, that's your practice. If you have kids and whenever they show you or they say things or they show you who they are in different beautiful manifestations of life that they are, if you find yourself labeling them, oh, she's lazy, she's clumsy, she's loud, she's talkative, watch out for those labels. That's your spiritual practice. You can awaken through that. Really, in everything that you do, even in the way that you talk to yourself, you can catch yourself doing that compulsive labeling and start right there. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a beautiful, aware week filled with the wonders and adventures of life and not threatened by assumptions and labeling. Happy unchaining.
And don't forget to support by liking, rating, subscribing, and sharing with your family and friends. Thank you so much, and see you with the next episode.